hoping that works out is we're going to at least look at the first step and look at the first tradition. All right? Because if the first step is the most important step, then it might follow suit that the first tradition was picked because it's the most important tradition. Okay. So let me do some reading out loud, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now I'm going to try to do this without my hearing aid in, okay?
Okay.
All right. Okay. Step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. And that could be anything. That could be worry, fear, jealousy, envy, any of the sins, that are out there, that are available. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. Okay, so we admit that we're powerless, and we have found our lives to be unmanageable. And the step is done by admitting that. So you can tell yourself something, okay? But when you actually tell another person, then you know that you really believe it. So the admission is from the mouth, okay? It's not just a thought. Admission is not just a thought that you take serious. It is actually you're actually admitting to the world that you have this fault, that you have that you are not perfect. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So now it's going to get into detail. Who cares to admit complete defeat? Practically no one, of course. Every natural instinct cries out against the idea of personal powerlessness. It is truly awful to admit that, glass in hand, we have warped our minds into such an obsession for destructive drinking that only an act of providence can remove it from us. No other kind of bankruptcy is like this one. Alcohol now becomes the creditor, the severe creditor, bleeds us of all self-sufficiency and all will to resist its demands. Once this stark fact is accepted, our bankruptcy as going human concerns is complete. But upon entering AA, we soon take another we soon take quite another view of this absolute humiliation. We perceive that only through utter defeat are we able to take our first steps towards liberation and strength. Our admission of personal powerlessness finally turns out to be the firm bedrock upon which happy and purposeful lives may be built. We know that little good can come to any alcoholic who joins AA unless he has first accepted his devastated weakness and all its consequences. Until he so humbles himself, his sobriety, if any, will be precarious. Of real happiness, he will find none at all. Okay? Proved beyond any doubt by immense experience. This is one of the facts of AA life. The principle that we shall find no enduring strength until we first admit complete defeat is the main taproot from which our whole society has sprung and flowered. When first challenged to admit defeat, most of us revolt. We had approached AA expecting to be taught self-confidence. Okay. We had approached AA expecting to be taught self-confidence. Then we have been told that so far as alcohol is concerned, self-confidence was no good whatsoever. In fact, it was a total liability. Our sponsors declared that we were the victims of a mental obsession so subtly powerful that no amount of human willpower could break it. That was, they said, there was no such thing as a personal conquest of this compulsion by the unaided will. Relentlessly deepening our dilemma, our sponsors pointed out our increasing sensitivity to alcohol, an allergy they called it. The tyrant alcohol wielded a double-edged sword over us. First, we were smitten by an insane urge that condemned us to go on drinking. Then, by an allergy of the body that ensured we would ultimately destroy ourselves in the process. Few indeed were those who assailed had ever won through it single-handed combat. It was a statistical fact that alcoholics almost never recovered on their own resources. And this had been true, apparently, ever since man had first crushed grapes. In AA's pioneering time, none but the most desperate cases could swallow and digest this unpalatable truth. Even these last gaspers often had difficulty in realizing how hopeless they actually were. But a few did, and when these laid hold of AA principles with all the fervor with which a drowning with which the drowning sees life preservers, they almost invariably got well. That is why the first edition of this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, published when our membership was small, dealt with low bottom cases only. Many less desperate alcoholics tried AA, but they did not succeed because they could not make the admission of hopelessness. It is a tremendous satisfaction to record that in the following years this changed. Alcoholics who still had their health, their families, their jobs, even 2 cars in the garage, began to recognize their alcoholism. As this trend grew, they were joined by young people who were scarcely more than potential alcoholics. They were spared that last 10 or 15 years of literal hell the rest of us had gone through. Since step 1 requires an admission that our lives had become unmanageable, how could people such as these take this step? It was obviously necessary to raise the bottom. The rest of us had hit to the point where it would hit them. By going back in our lives and our own drinking histories, we could show that years before we realized we were out of control, that our drinking even then was no mere habit, that it was indeed the beginning of a fatal progression. To the doubters, we could say, perhaps you're not an alcoholic after all. Why don't you try some more controlled drinking? Bearing in mind, meanwhile, what we have told you about alcoholism. This attitude brought immediate and practical results. It was then discovered that when one alcoholic had planted in the mind of another the true nature of his malady, that persons could never be the same again. Following every spree, he would say to himself, maybe those AAs were right. After a few such experiences, often years before the onset of extreme difficulties, he would return to us convinced he had hit bottom as truly as any of us. John Barleycorn himself had become our best advocate. So in other words, the alcohol itself had become our best advocate, okay? And you can translate that also when we try to stop certain sins in our life, okay? Mm-hmm. We only excite them, okay? So that we are more under their influence. Okay, and Paul talks about that in Romans. He says the law excites sin. So the more you try to not do something, okay, by the law, okay, mm-hmm. the more it has power over you. All right. Why all this insistence that every AA must hit bottom first? The answer is that few people will sincerely try to practice the AA program unless they have hit bottom. For practicing AA's remaining 11 steps means the adoption of attitudes and actions that almost no alcoholic who is still drinking can dream of taking. Who wishes to be rigorously honest and tolerant? Who wants to confess his faults to another and make restitution for harm done? Who cares anything about a higher power, let alone meditation and prayer? Who wants to sacrifice time and energy in trying to carry the AA message to the next sufferer? No, the average alcoholic, self-centered in the extreme, doesn't care for this prospect unless he has to do these things in order to stay alive himself. So, under the lash of alcoholism, we are driven to AA, and there we discover the fatal nature of our situation. Then, and only then, do we become as open-minded to conviction as willing to listen as the dying can be. We stand ready to do anything which will lift the merciless obsession from us. Okay, so this can be compared with a minister telling you that there is no good in you. Okay? There is no way for you to please God without Him changing you completely, without Him changing your nature. You cannot please God in the flesh. So that is the same as what the alcoholic faces, okay, with alcohol. Hopelessness. Hopeless. We're hopeless without God being our reliance. And that is the 100% step that everybody has to do. You can't say, well, I'm going to live in the middle of the road and I'm going to do good, okay? And then I'll be able to face God on Judgment Day and bring all this doing good stuff in front of Him. And He's going to say, oh, you were awful good. You know, you did a great job. You know, you did. You lived your life in such a way that, yeah, welcome to heaven. No. He's going to say, you loved everything but me in this world. And the first thing I asked you to do was love thy God with all the heart, mind, and soul. And you didn't do it perfectly. So, I have no choice but to send, pretty much send you through more judgment until you finally reach the level of hopelessness that will send you to loving me. So, God says many times in the scripture, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. And He will take every life, every human being that He is going to save will be taken to that level of judgment to know Him. Period. Okay, that's step one. And what I had to do when I was faced with that, and I had to do that step, okay, what I did was I got on my knees and I told God that I was going to give up what I thought I knew about him. I was going to give everything up in my mind that I thought I knew who he was. I was going to go ahead and die, okay, to the idea that I know you, Lord. And I want you to show me who you are. And that's what worked for me. But you can imagine how deflated I felt doing that. You know, because I had told people about God all the time, you know. Okay. Anyway, now let's look at tradition number 1.